The fall from the second facet wasn't just a fall. It was a plunge, as if the darkness of hell itself had swallowed me, clamping down with its jaws. The air turned thick as tar, and every breath was a struggle, as if I were swallowing liquid lead that burned my throat and settled in my chest, heavy and caustic. The wind whipping against me was laced with the stench of rust, rotting flesh, and something else, sickly sweet, like spoiled honey, making my mind spin and my memories of life dissolve like ashen water. I didn't know how long the fall lasted because time here didn't flow. It stood still, pulsing like a diseased heart, stretching into eternity one moment and compressing into a single agonizing instant the next. The ground didn't meet me with a crash, but with an engulfing pull. I sank into it like quicksand, and it closed over me, hot, wet, alive, as if I'd been swallowed into the womb of some monstrous creature. When the darkness parted, I found myself in the third facet of hell, a place where not individual sinners, but entire eras were punished, their sins woven into the 20th century's web of greed, betrayal, and destruction. This wasn't just a circle of torment. It was a symphony of pain, forged from human vices, where every sound, every smell, every glint of light was steeped in despair. The ground beneath my feet wasn't earth, but a mosaic of shattered glass, rusted iron, and bones that crunched with every step, digging into my non-existent soles, leaving the sensation of thousands of needles piercing me from below. Blood seeped from the cracks, but it didn't flow freely. It moved as if alive, forming patterns that resembled maps of burned cities, stock market charts, and battlefields. Above me hung a vault, but not of stone. It was woven from black smoke that writhed like clouds, and within its swirls, faces flickered, distorted by screams, their eyes glowing a dull green like swamp lights, luring me into the abyss. I stepped forward, and the air trembled with a low hum, as if millions of machines were working in unison, but their rhythm was uneven, faltering, like the last breaths of the dying. Before me stretched a plain, but not an empty one. It was dotted with machines that resembled factories, though their chimneys spewed not smoke but screams that merged into a chorus, a sound that would have turned my bones, if I had any, to dust. These machines were alive, their metal pulsing like flesh, their gears grinding like bones crushing each other. At the center of each machine was a person, or what was left of them. Their bodies fused with the iron, wires burrowing into their skin, levers moving to tear off chunks of flesh that regrew instantly, so the torment never ceased. I recognized them as financiers and industrialists whose greed fueled wars and crises of the 20th century. Their faces were distorted, their eyes melting from the heat, but they couldn't look away from the counters flashing before them, displaying their wealth in numbers that rose and fell in mockery. The machines hissed, releasing steam that reeked of oil and blood, and each burst of steam was the scream of another soul whose life had been crushed by their avarice. I passed by and reached the edge of a chasm that gaped like an open wound. A hot, acrid wind rose from it, laced with the smell of gunpowder and burnt plastic. I peered down and saw a field pocked with craters, as if after a bombardment. But these craters were alive. They breathed, pulsed, tongues of flame erupting from their depths to lick at those crawling across the field. These were soldiers, generals, engineers who had created the weapons of the 20th century: tanks, bombs, gas chambers. Their bodies were torn apart, but wouldn't die, their limbs regrowing so the explosions could rip them apart again. I recognized one by his ash-covered uniform. It was Fritz Haber, the chemist whose gas choked thousands in World War I. His lungs burned. He coughed up green sludge that hissed on the ground, and the shadows of soldiers who suffocated in the trenches surrounded him, their hands reaching for his throat, squeezing but not killing. The craters spewed new clouds of gas that seared his skin, and he writhed, but he couldn't escape. The ground clung to him like a bog, pulling his legs into the molten mud. The chasm gave way to a river, but not of water. It was a river of molten metal, flowing slowly like lava, and in it, those who betrayed for power were drowning. Their bodies floated on the surface but didn't burn away, their skin bubbling, cracking, exposing smoking bones that were quickly covered by new flesh. Among them, I saw politicians, spies, diplomats whose schemes shattered the fates of nations. One, his face covered in burns, resembled Vidkun Quisling, the Norwegian traitor who collaborated with the Nazis. His hands were tied to an anchor of molten iron that dragged him down, but the river wouldn't let him drown, pushing him back up to burn again. The shadows of his countrymen, whose lives he sold, stood on the shore, their eyes glowing like coals, throwing chunks of metal at him that hissed as they embedded into his body. The river churned, spitting up splashes that fell on the bank, leaving smoking pits that reeked of sulfur and blood. I stepped further, and the plain turned into a forest, but not of trees, of poles resembling telegraph posts, though instead of wires, strips of human skin stretched between them, trembling and emitting a low hum like a moan. On each pole hung a soul, crucified, their bodies pierced by wires that sparked, burning their flesh. These were media moguls, propagandists whose words ignited wars and hatred. Their mouths were sewn shut with molten wire, but they still tried to scream, and each sound came with blood that dripped down, feeding the ground that bubbled like a boiling cauldron. I recognized one, Joseph Goebbels, whose lies poisoned millions of minds. His eyes were open, pupils burning like coals, and he stared ahead at a screen woven from smoke, where images of the destroyed cities he helped create flickered. The wires sparked harder, and his body jerked like a marionette, his skin cracking but not tearing, so the torment would last forever. The forest gave way to a desert, but not of sand. It was covered in ash that rose into the air, with every step clogging my throat like dry earth. At the center of the desert stood a tower forged of iron and glass, but the glass was cracked, the iron rusted, stained with blood. Around the tower crawled souls, their hands chained to links that stretched toward the top. These were scientists and engineers whose inventions, from atomic bombs to biological weapons, sowed death. Their bodies were covered in burns, their eyes melting from the heat, but they couldn't stop, the chains pulling them upward where a fire burned blue like a star, searing them to the bone, their bones cracking like dry twigs. I recognized Robert Oppenheimer, whose bomb changed the world. His hands burned, but he kept climbing, ash settling on his face, mixing with the blood dripping from his wounds. The fire above flared brighter, and the shadows of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rose from the ash, their silhouettes trembling like a mirage, surrounding him with silent reproach. The desert turned into a swamp, where the mud wasn't mud, but a mixture of blood, oil, and bones that crunched underfoot like broken glass. At the center of the swamp rose a mountain of human bodies, writhing as if alive, their hands reaching upward, but unable to break free. These were those who profited from wars, arms dealers, oil tycoons, whose fortunes grew on blood. Their bodies were covered in sores oozing pus and worms, long and fat with beady eyes, gnawed at their flesh but didn't kill them. The mountain breathed, its surface rising and falling, each breath releasing steam that reeked of oil and death. I watched as the worms burrowed deeper, and the souls screamed, their mouths filled with the mud that flowed inside, muffling their sounds. The swamp gave way to a cave, its walls covered in faces carved from stone. But these faces were alive. They blinked, whispered, their lips trembling, releasing smoke that curled like snakes. At the center of the cave stood a massive cauldron forged of black iron, and in it boiled not water but blood, bubbling and hissing, spitting out splashes that burned the walls. In the cauldron were those who lied for power, dictators whose regimes thrived on fear. Their bodies dissolved in the blood, but didn't disappear, their skin peeling like paper, their bones cracking, yet they kept floating, their eyes open, staring into the void. I recognized Francisco Franco, whose dictatorship strangled Spain. His hands clawed at the cauldron's edge, but demons with cracked faces stabbed him with spears that sparked like lightning, and the blood flared, burning his face. The cave began to tremble, the walls closing in, releasing steam that smelled of sulfur and rot. The ground split open, and I fell deeper into darkness thicker than tar. The Lord of Hell's voice thundered. This is only the third facet. I woke drenched in sweat, the taste of ash in my mouth. This is the third part of 5. Like and comment if you want to know what the next facet holds, where hell draws even closer to the heart of darkness.